Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Hartman. I'm a member of the Housing Services team here at Housing Services at Carnegie Mellon, and I'm here to talk you through our virtual information session about room selection 2024. Our room selection information sessions are typically primarily targeted towards current residents who may be returning to campus housing for next year. But we know that this can also be a really helpful resource for parents or guardians who are helping their student navigate through this process. So we welcome everyone who has joined us here today. Let's jump in. Just to give an overview of our agenda for the conversation today, we're going to highlight a few things that are important to know about room selection. We're going to talk about eligibility and who is eligible to participate in room selection and who may not be eligible. We're going to go through the application processes that are part of room selection, so including the fraternity and sorority application process, our Forbes-Beeler special selection process, and then general room selection, which is the phase that most students participate in. Then we'll talk a little bit about our upper class building options for those of you who may not be familiar with them, and we'll end the presentation with a few resources that will be helpful. I'll also mention that at the bottom of some slides, I will include links to our website where additional information may be related to that topic. So you can see that here. That's just our main room selection website. I know you can't click on the links from a recorded Zoom presentation, but hopefully you'll be able to pause and reference those links if needed, and you can refer back to them later. So let's start by talking about a few things that are important to know. We'll talk about it again in a moment too, but only current residents are eligible for room selection. The only exception to that rule really may be prior residents who are abroad for a semester who lived with us the semester prior to going abroad and who are returning with us the semester immediately following. But students who are off campus or on a leave of absence, they aren't eligible for room selection. So it's important to know whether or not you're eligible when making plans. It's important to know that students have to actively participate in room selection. So just because you're eligible for room selection does not mean that you're going to be assigned to housing if you don't do anything. So students have to actively participate. They have to start a room selection application. They have to sign their housing contract. They need to select a room themselves. So none of those things will happen unless a student chooses to participate. Also, we wanted to let you know there isn't a cancellation period post room selection. So once you select a space during the room selection process, you are committed to your housing contract. So room selection is not for students who are planning to live off campus for the next academic year. Room selection is really just for students who plan to live with us. And just to say that room selection shouldn't be and can't be used as a backup plan, because once you go through room selection, you will be committed to that contract for the academic year. As a reminder, and we'll talk about it in more detail, but if you are planning on living in your fraternity or sorority house for the next academic year, that has its own application process, and we will highlight the details about that in a few slides. Additionally, if you aren't familiar with it, Forbes-Beeler is our newest building on campus. It's very popular. Because of its popularity and the demand for that building, we will be holding a special selection process so that students know in advance whether or not they are going to be receiving a space in Forbes-Beeler, and then those who aren't will have opportunity to make a backup plan. And the last thing that I think is really important to know, but optional, so not required by any means, is just to know that being part of a roommate group will increase your options during general room selection. So we have a wide variety of buildings here. They have different occupancy levels, so between singles, doubles, 3, 4, 5 residents in our multi-bedroom units. You do need to generally have a roommate group that fills that unit when selecting in those spaces. And again, we'll talk about all of this in more detail, but just wanted to highlight some of those key things that are most important right up front. So I touched on this a little bit already, but who is eligible for room selection? Essentially, in order to be eligible for room selection, you need to be a current first year, sophomore or junior. So meaning a current class 1, class 2, or class 3 as defined by SIO, so Student Information Online. If your class is not correct on Student Information Online, make sure that you're working with your academic advisor, because your class standing is defined by SIO. That's the information we receive. You need to be currently living in campus housing at the time that room selection is occurring. So whether you're living in Greek housing or in campus housing, you're eligible either way, but you do need to be living in campus housing at that time. So if you take a leave of absence in January, you're not going to be eligible for room selection in February. You do need to have plans to enroll as a full-time undergraduate for the 24-25 academic year. If you're not eligible to enroll for the next academic year, you're not going to be automatically eligible for room selection. And you need to not be scheduled to graduate prior to May 2025. So again, this contract that you'll be signing is for the full academic year, both fall 24 and spring 2025 semester. So if you're scheduled to graduate prior to May 2025, you will not automatically be eligible for room selection. This is just a quick overview of our calendar. This presentation is going to seem like a lot. It's going to seem like a lot of dates and details, but really room selection just happens in a 2-week period. Everything opens on February 14th, and then different things close off as application deadlines approach. But students, we're not talking about a ton of time needed to get dedicated to this. The application process takes a few minutes. Finding roommates and forming roommate groups probably takes the most time. And then online self-selection, which happens that week of February 26th. Again, it's just a few minutes depending on, how quickly you're able to select a room. So everything is happening in a pretty condensed time frame. The week of February 19th is when some of those special processes are happening, like fraternity sorority and Forbes Beeler. But everything is happening in February. And so just be mindful of these dates as you are making your plans for next year. There are other opportunities in addition to this virtual information session to learn more about room selection. Our open houses are a great opportunity for particularly first-year students who may not be familiar with the upper class buildings to see those buildings in person, to talk to RAs who live there, who are part of the programmatic efforts in those buildings and can talk a little bit about the lived experience of those buildings. But then there will also be opportunities to see rooms. And so really get a sense of what those spaces are like and what it might be like to live there. Those open houses are happening on February 6th and 7th from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. regardless of weather. So sometimes in February, we are not blessed with the best weather, but they will be happening either way. So please come out, talk to your RAs. Sometimes RAs will bring groups around, so you can tour with your floor or your building. But please come out and see those buildings. I also included a link here with our open house map so that you can see where those buildings are located and make a plan about like which buildings you want to prioritize when you come to the open houses. We will also be having in-hall sessions. So typically it's an RA having a floor session, a floor meeting specifically about room selection. And so we have student staff who are called room selection assistants who come into the halls and present during floor meetings some of this information about room selection. So particularly for first-year students who may be new to this process, but really anyone who hasn't gone through room selection before or would like a refresher, definitely attend your in-hall session that's going to be held by your RA or CA. We also will be doing information tables in the Cohen University Center, basically every weekday from January 29th through February 14th from 11:30 to 12:30. So during that lunch hour when most students are free, pop by. Our room selection assistants and our room assignments team will be staffing those tables and there to answer particularly specific questions you have about your individual situation. So if there's something that you're trying to work through or you're wondering about what's the best approach for a particular option that you're investigating, definitely stop by and have that one-on-one conversation with a staff member. And then finally, we will be planning and scheduling some in-hall information tables. So similar to the CUC information tables, but in entranceways of buildings, particularly in first-year buildings, so that as students are coming and going, they'll have the opportunity to ask those questions. So there are a lot of opportunities to have your questions asked or have your questions answered, and we hope to see you at many of these events. Okay, so let's dig into our phases of room selection. I'm going to start first with our fraternity and sorority housing application. This is sort of a separate process, but it happens within the room selection timeframe. So I'm going to talk about this. It's probably the last I will talk about fraternity sorority in this presentation, because if you're going to be living in your fraternity or sorority house next year, this is all you need to do. So just follow these deadlines, complete these steps within the timeframes, and you'll be all set for your fraternity or sorority assignment. This is basically only for students who are already a member of a fraternity or sorority organization who plan to or are being asked or required to live in their chapter house for the next academic year. This is not determined by housing. These are determined by chapter leadership. So if you or your student is part of a fraternity or sorority, they should be talking to their chapter leadership to see if there's a live-in requirement, or if they want to live in the house, what kind of vacancies and options there are available in the house, because most chapters do want as many members as possible to live with them. So talk to chapter leadership about whether or not you should be going through this process before you start a fraternity sorority application. But if you have been notified that you're being pulled into the house or that there's a space there for you, all you need to do is start your Greek 24-25 academic year application. Join your specific fraternity or sorority chapter roommate group, and they'll send you the details with the group name and password for joining that group. And then you're going to sign your housing contract and submit your application to confirm that that's your plan, is to live in your sorority or fraternity house. And then you're really done. So once you sign your contract and submit your application, at that point, chapter leadership within your organization actually assigns you to a specific space within the chapter house. So if you're curious about where you might be assigned and you want to talk through that, just talk to your chapter leadership. Again, housing services does not, we manage that process, but we do not make those decisions about who lives where or who should be living in the house. So talk to your chapter leadership, but if you're going to be living there, this is all you need to do, and the link is at the bottom if you want more information about this process. Also want to talk about a few other subgroups who, again, like if you're part of one of these groups, follow this process. That's all you need to know. The rest of the presentation probably doesn't even really apply to you because you're going to be done once you do these steps. So if you are being hired as a resident assistant, as a community advisor, if you're being pulled into Spirit House, which has a designated house for their organization members, or if you're a student with a medical or disability accommodation who needs to be assigned through our med needs process, you will be assigned to a room manually by the assignments team prior to the general room selection process at the end of February. So if you fall into any of these groups, you will be notified of your assignment once that's made, or in the case of med needs, there's a little bit of back and forth, and we'll work with you to decide, is it a manual assignment, or are you just planning on going through the room selection process with roommates or with a roommate group, for example. So, but if you have landed on an assignment, or if you've been hired as an RA or CA, or you're being pulled into Spirit, once you know you're going to be having that space, then all you need to do is start your academic year application. Kind of click through the steps. There's a few pages about like lifestyle preferences and things like that. You're going to view your assignment, make sure it's what you were expecting it to be. And then you sign your housing contract and complete your application. At that point, you're done. So once you have an assignment for next year, you're not eligible to participate in a later phase of room selection, and there's nothing else you need to do. So again, if you fall into one of these groups, this is all you need to know in terms of your room selection participation. Also going to touch briefly about the Forbes-Beeler special selection process. This process sort of came out of the correctly anticipated demand for our newest building, Forbes-Beeler, which is located on Forbes Avenue. And for example, last year we had over 700 applicants through this Forbes-Beeler special selection process for around 250 bed spaces. So it is very competitive. And there are really strict and sort of specific guidelines and rules that manage this process if you want to be part of it. So a few things that I'll mention is that roommate groups for the Forbes-Beeler special selection process must be groups of 4. These are 8-person units, and you can see more on our website about what those look like. But each group of 4 will have a half of an apartment, half of a unit. And so Have to have groups of 4, no smaller, no larger. It is going to be a very competitive process again this year. So for that reason, we do a separate lottery process in advance of general room selection so that students know in advance of general room selection that either they're going to be eligible to receive a space in Forbes-Beeler or they are not going to be eligible to receive a space in Forbes-Beeler. And so at that point, students who are not receiving a time slot to select in this building will automatically be made eligible to receive a time slot for general room selection. So we'll automatically or we'll manually convert special selection process applications to general room selection for any student who's not going to be placed in Forbes-Beeler. If you're going to keep your same roommate group, there's nothing else you need to do. Although in many cases, students are going to find themselves wanting to alter their roommate groups because there are sort of limited options for groups of 4. So sometimes students will often what we see is breaking up into groups of 2 for some double options. But we do have other options for groups who don't get Forbes-Beeler that you can consider for general room selection. Margaret Morrison Apartments is a great option for groups of 4. We also have some spaces for groups of 5, such as our Roselawn houses or our West Wing suites. And so you're just finding one other person to add to your group of 4 can give you a group of 5 to make you eligible for that. So just know if you don't get into Forbes-Beeler, all is not lost. You will still be eligible for general room selection to go through that process, and there are still plenty of options. You just may need to reconsider your roommate groups and obviously what buildings you're going to be considering. And like I mentioned, selected groups, they will be groups of 4 who will be selecting on one side of the unit. So, and you have to be contained to that side. So typically one side of a unit in Forbes-Beeler is 2 single rooms and 1 double. So think about in advance when you're applying, if your group is selected, who's going to be in the double, who's going to be in the singles, because you are contained to that side. So you're not going to be able to take 4 singles or anything like that. You have to stay on your side of the unit. And as I sort of already hinted at, just make sure you have a backup plan if you're participating in Forbes-Beeler, because it is competitive. Not everyone is going to get it. And so make sure that you're thinking about, well, if I don't get the Forbes-Beeler process, what are my other building options? What other buildings might I be interested in? So that's another reason why those open houses are great, so you can kind of see other spaces you might want to live in. And now I'm going to talk about general room selection. This is the process through which the vast majority of our residents are going to go through. So 75 to 80% of our returning residents go through general room selection. It's our main phase of room selection. This is for individuals who are selecting by themselves, but also for students with roommate groups of 2 through 5 roommates. And having a roommate group does sort of determine what options you're going to have during your time slots, as well as give you more options if you are interested in such as like a multi-bedroom apartment or house. You need to fill those houses with roommates. So keep that in mind. Everyone who applies for general room selection will receive an individual assigned time slot. So you will have a specific day and time that you will be able to log into the housing portal to assign yourself. If you are in a roommate group, let's say that you're in a roommate group of 3, all 3 individuals will receive their individual time slot. And so you have the opportunity then to identify who has the best time slot. And that person can log in at their time slot and assign the full group. So part of joining a roommate group is essentially saying, I give any of these individuals in this roommate group the ability to assign me to a room if they have the better time slot. The other reason that we give everybody their own individual time slot is that there are going to be instances where groups may need to break up. So, for example, if you were planning on living in a Roselawn house, which is a group of 5, but those houses are full, the group may decide to break up into a group of 2 and a group of 3 to try for a different space. And so when that breakup happens, then everyone still has an individual time slot. So then the best time slot of that pair of 2 and the best time slot of the group of 3 can then go in and select a space for their roommate group size. So it gives the ability for there to be pretty dynamic roommate group changing if necessary. And then no one is kind of left out in the cold in the sense of like they will always have their own time slot to select if needed. As I mentioned, roommate group size will determine what buildings you can select during the normal time slots. And I'll touch on that in a couple of slides about roommate option or room options for roommate groups. Also wanted to mention extended selection. So extended selection is our last day of our online room selection process, where we're not issuing time slots for this last day. It's basically a sort of free-for-all day where those rules are taken off, and anyone who hasn't selected yet or who missed their time slot can select from anything left that's available. So for example, if there happens to be an empty Roselawn house of 5, and when we get to extended selection, there's no longer a rule or requirement that you have to have a roommate group of 5 to select that space. And so it'll let you select a single or a double room in a multi-bedroom apartment if they're still available at the end of the process, and you don't have any requirements to fill that space. Just keep in mind that, for example, if you select a double room, and there's no one else assigned there yet, it does not mean that you're not going to have a roommate. You should absolutely expect that either a new roommate is going to self-assign themselves to that space, or we will assign you a new roommate over the summer months. So selecting an empty double by no means that you're going to have a double by yourself. We plan on being at full occupancy for the fall, and so just assume that you'll have a roommate if you are in a double or a triple room. And as I sort of alluded to already, general room selection is all online. Students are self-selecting their own rooms based on what is available at that time. So depending on your time slot or the best time slot of your group. And I will show you in a few slides kind of what that looks like when you're going online to do your self-selection. The application steps. So I talked a lot about like when you have your time slot, but in order to get a time slot, you do need to complete all of the application steps for general room selection. So there's a welcome page answering some lifestyle questions in case we have to assign you a roommate. You sign your housing contract at this step. So you have to sign your housing contract in order to be eligible for a time slot. You submit your general room selection application. So as long as you submit by that deadline, you receive a time slot on that Friday of that week. And then optional is sort of at that point starting roommate group. So you can submit your application and be eligible for your time slot, and then continue to still have conversations with individuals about whether or not you want to room together. And you can manipulate those roommate groups on the fly after you're submitted. So that is a nice option because you can submit your application and have that piece done while you're still thinking about and talking to roommates. And then the last step is just general room selection, online room selection, where you have to actively log in at or after your time slot to select your own room. These are just a few screenshots of what the application looks like. This is the housing, actually it's called the housing contract now, so I'll have to update this image, but your housing contract, like I said, is part of the application process in order to submit and be eligible for a time slot. A common question that we get is, well, why do I have to sign my contract now? Like, what if I decide I don't want a space? Signing the contract is what makes you eligible to receive a time slot, but you are not required to select a space during your time slot or during that week. So students who decide that they have who decide to go off campus or are living elsewhere, as long as you don't select a space during general room selection, then your contract will be canceled later. Just keep in mind that if you're joining a roommate group where you're giving the roommates the right to assign you, the moment that you either self-select a room for yourself or that a roommate assigned you to a room as part of their roommate group, this contract is activated and you are bound to the dates of this contract. So just keep that in mind if you are thinking about other options. As I mentioned at the beginning, room selection isn't really meant for students who are planning on going off campus. So we really, if you're not planning on living in campus housing, I don't recommend that you go through this process. We have a separate process later if your off-campus plans fall through and you need housing later on. I talked about roommate groups, and these are just a slide to sort of show what it looks like on the roommate groups page. So you can start a new group by clicking the create group option. You can request to join a group if you have a friend who already created a group. You can browse roommates, you can message with roommates. You can search for specific roommates if you know their Android ID. And so just keep that in mind that these are on option. It's available at any time. So like I said, if you were part of a group and a group breaks up, you can start your own new group and pull in your own friends. So we do strongly encourage everyone to participate as part of a roommate group. A lot of our spaces are doubles. We have very few singles in our housing inventory, and a lot of those singles are part of multi-bedroom apartments. So it's a 2-bedroom apartment consisting of a double and a single. or a 5-occupant apartment that's a double single. And so those singles are only going to be available to groups that can fill the entire unit. A lot of those single rooms aren't available for individuals who are selecting by themselves. So even for double rooms, if you want your best options, it is nice to be in a roommate group where you know who you're going to be living with. I mentioned this already, but roommate group pages are live throughout the process. So roommates can be added, dropped, etc. Know that notifications are sent whenever a person is added or dropped from a group. So this isn't an anonymous process. If you do drop someone from your group, they will be notified. If they leave your group, you will be notified. And so we are trying to be very transparent so that nobody feels like they're being left in the dark as part of a roommate group. And like I mentioned already too, all members of the roommate group will receive an individual time slot, and the best time slot can select for the group, or the individual can select on their own if their group breaks up. And then when we get to the online sort of self-selection point, this is what it looks like. And so, basically you're given all of the building options for upper class students. You select that building. And then typically it will ask you about a floor. Do you want a lower floor or a higher floor? And you can click a floor. And then you're going to see the available options on that floor. And so in this example for Fifth and Clyde House, you can see, right, there's the double rooms that are available. In this case, you're only seeing double rooms because I think that's primarily what Fifth and Clyde consists of. But you can browse through all of this. You can use the filters on the left to switch buildings, to switch room types, to see what's available. If you want to see if there's any singles available, you can do that. So there's a lot of opportunity to browse. We do recommend doing your homework in advance. So knowing what you're interested in and what you want will help you to sort of get through this process a little bit quicker. Because keep in mind, when time slots are happening, you're not the only one in at that time. There's typically 5 people per 5 minutes who are selecting at any given time slot. And so the longer you take to come to a decision, you may miss out on a good space. A space could be taken while you're browsing it, and someone else could grab it. So do your homework. That's again why we encourage the open houses. Think about your building options. Think about your roommate options while in advance of this process, so that you can sort of navigate through it fairly quickly. And then I know, a blessing and a curse of our housing system is that at Carnegie Mellon, like all of our buildings are extremely different. No one building is alike. It's great because we have really unique options and a lot of opportunities for a lot of different roommate group sizes, but it also can make it feel a little more complicated because some of our spaces only have opportunities for groups of 2 or 3. And so what we tried to do on the room selection website, and I linked that direct link here, is to sort of break out your housing options by roommate group size so that students can say like, hey, I have a group of 3, what are my options? And so what this is just showing that like for residents who are in a roommate group, here are your options for your group size. And then on the right-hand side, just to say like there are options for residents who are selecting as an individual, or if you have a smaller roommate group. So Fifth and Clyde semi-suite rooms, Fairfax apartment doubles, and studio doubles are available for either a roommate group of 2 or individuals who are selecting by themselves. So for these spaces on the right-hand column, you can have a group of 2 and still select them, but you don't have to have a group of 2 in order to select them. So use this page for sure to sort of think about those options as you're planning your roommate groups and thinking about what buildings you're going to rank on your list, so that when you get into online room selection, you can navigate through that fairly quickly. These are the important dates for general room selection. Essentially, February 14th is when the application opens for all eligible students. There is no priority to starting your application earlier, and there's nothing that happens if you wait until the last minute, as long as you have submitted your application prior to February 23rd at noon. So 12 p.m. noon, not midnight. Make sure that you are submitted in order to get your time slot. Again, you can still do roommate group stuff after that date, but you have to be in submitted status. You will receive an email that says your application has been submitted, so you know you did that. So just make sure that you do that between that time frame. These application steps, like to get you to that point where you're submitted, takes about 60 seconds to maybe 2 or 3 minutes. It's a very quick process. And so, just log in at some point in order to submit that application and then start thinking about your roommate groups. On February 23rd by 5 p.m. So that same day, right? Application closes at noon. We are generating time slots in that afternoon and then sending emails to everybody, letting them know what their time slot will be for the following week. And so general room selection time slots will be emailed to everyone who has successfully submitted, typically by 5 p.m. on Friday. Sometimes it's a little bit later, depending on if we run into any problems, but expect it that afternoon. And then starting Monday, usually Monday afternoon, is when time slots will begin. So I think generally time slots begin around 1 p.m. They tend to run into the evening, so usually 7 p.m. or so. And so students will get a specific time slot with a date for Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and then a specific 5-minute time slot that is dedicated to the few individuals who have received that time slot. And so every 5 minutes, there are new groups going in to select. Again, that's why that's valuable to have your preferences sort of ready to go during online room selection so that you can go in, know what you want to navigate to and select that fairly quickly. February 29th, which is the Thursday of that week, that's going to be extended selection. So that's for anyone who missed their time slot or who chose to wait and kind of take a chance to see if there might be good spaces left during extended selection. Sometimes students do get good spaces during extended selection if there are some multi-bedroom units left when that time comes. No guarantee, so it is a calculated risk, but something to think about and a chance that some students do take. We will send out an email to anyone who had a time slot but hadn't already selected a room about the extended selection process starting so that students can log in and then select a space from the remaining inventory. If you do select a space during your time slot on the 26th, 27th, or 28th, you are done. You're not eligible to select a space during extended selection. And so just keep in mind, once you're assigned to a room for next year, you're kind of done. There's no playing like two options or sort of holding a space while you're trying for another chance at something else. So once you have a space, you're done. And then just to touch on our upper class building options briefly, our building options have not changed for upper class students, with the exception of Resnick, which has been removed from the upper class building list and will be a first-year building next year. We will have additional options in Morewood Gardens for upper class students. So this year there was a pretty small percentage of upper class students in Morewood. There'll be more opportunities for students who wish to live in Morewood next year. And other than that, everything is available, same as last year. And so we have a lot of apartment buildings. We hear and know that apartment options are important to upper class students who want to have a little bit more independence, but still be in the campus housing system, and have the opportunity to cook and have a kitchen and all of that. So we do have a lot of apartment options for our upper class students, but also have residence hall options for students who want that traditional residence hall experience as an upper class student. And those options also tend to be a little bit less expensive. So residence hall options are there for students who would like them. This document, I linked it here. Again, I know you can't click on the link, but if you pause this and you want to go directly to it, this will take you straight to the PDF. This is our upper class housing communities. We call this the amenities document. Kind of at a glance, it's showing you the building, kind of the neighborhood that it's located in, what room types are available here, what type of bathroom situation it is. Is it air conditioned? Is there a fitness center? What kind of kitchen? Is there an elevator? So all of those amenities, things that we have heard are important to students and factors in their decision-making process. We kind of outlined all of those here so that at a glance, you can see where are their apartments, where can I be in the Hill? If I want to be in the Hill neighborhood, I want to make sure I have a kitchen, or I want to make sure that I have air conditioning. Excuse me. This is going to sort of help you navigate those options. And so there is a QR code here. I think it might work if you're trying to access that through your phone, even on the screen, to take you straight to this form. So this PDF is really helpful. We'll have this available at the open houses as well. And so definitely reference this as you're sort of working through that planning process. Here are some of the key resources. I've touched on a lot of these already. Well, actually, just the main one that I've talked about. So our room selection website is the one-stop sort of site for all details related to room selection. Sorry. We also have room virtual tours. So these tours will allow you to sort of like actually navigate and walk through a lot of the rooms within these buildings. And so you can sort of see what a room would actually look like even without going to the open houses. It doesn't replace the open houses in my mind. That in-person experience, sorry, is valuable, but definitely use that as a resource. I want to touch briefly on just some resources. I've mentioned our room selection website. Also want to mention our virtual room tours, which are a great resource. They're like video tours that allow you to kind of walk through the rooms. And we have them for basically every room type in almost all of our buildings, except for 2, I think. We also have building photos and floor plans on the housing website. So if you want to look at the floor plan, the layout of a room, you have the ability to do that. Can be important for students who are looking for a specific view. If you want to be over like looking the street or facing south, like you can kind of help figure those things out based on our floor plans. And then probably our most important resource is our room assignments email address. So rmassign@andrew.cmu.edu. If you have any questions, if any of these resources can't answer your questions, if this presentation didn't answer a question or it prompted a question that you may have, feel free to email us. There are several people who check that email, so we are very good about getting back to you promptly and can help you work through situations. We can give you an email response or sometimes even set up a Zoom conversation to talk through your specific situation in more detail. So we hope that you found this presentation helpful. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you do have any other questions. We thank you for your time, and we really hope that you're looking forward to going through room selection. We are looking forward to welcoming you back to Carnegie Mellon Campus Housing in August of 2024. And so we will see you then. Thank you.